Hey guys, this is Chris. I just spent the last 2 weeks testing 54 filters for the Mavic 2 Pro and the Mavic 2 Zoom. Hopefully so you don't have to. I learned a ton about these. I did a crazy amount of testing. I tested every single one of them, at least the ones that actually would go on the drones, on the DroneDJ test target here. Tested all kinds of things, the sharpness of the image, the color, relative illumination, that's how dark the corners get. Took a closer look at the filters in terms of their coatings. Did they repel water? Are they scratch resistant? Are the colors correct? Do the coatings prevent ghost images? And I did some experimenting there as well. So all kinds of tests. There's definitely some big surprises here in terms of who's going to come out winners. Is it some of the top name brands like Polar Pro? Tiffen also entering the market here with some really nice filters. Are they going to beat out Polar Pro, which has been kind of a little more established in the drone market but less established as a filter maker, Tiffen around for decades? Or is it one of these startups? I've got filters from Sandmark, Skyreet, and Freewell. All are different. Now when I started this, I kind of figured some of these are just rebrands. Basically maybe Polar Pro is just stamping their name on somebody else's filter, or vice versa. Maybe one of these newer guys are just rebranding one of the bigger names. That is not the case. Actually very surprising to me. They're all different. They all have different little differences in the constructions, differences in the coatings as well. Some of them don't even actually fit on the drones. So we're going to take a look at all that stuff. I invested a lot of time doing all this work, guys. So if you appreciate this kind of work, make sure you subscribe to this channel. There's going to be a ton more videos like this. We try to do high quality stuff, and it does take a lot of time. So you subscribing, you watching, giving a like, that's all going to help this kind of content out. I'll be right back. So let's talk about price. So Tiffen and Polar Pro coming up very similar. The Pro filters both priced at $499, but Tiffen does have a discount on their zoom filters, $119.99, and they should be cheaper. It's less glass and they're a simple product, don't have all the fancy little retention features that have to be machined on the back like the Pro does. So did a good job pricing there, and I do expect Polar Pro to respond by taking maybe 20-30 bucks off the price of their zoom filters. Other guys, now they may be cheaper, but you often get fewer filters in the set. So the Sandmark set coming in at around $100, still $25 per filter for these guys, both Zoom and Pro. Freewell filters, the Pros are a little bit less expensive for the 6-pack, not the pack I got. But the zoom filters actually more expensive than Tiffen on their zoom filters. The Freewell 6-pack filters coming in at just over $21 per filter if you divide it out. Finally, Skyreet, unbelievable low-cost filters coming in at around 10 or 11 bucks. So a major cost savings. Question is it worth it? Are these filters any good? And we're going to be taking a closer look at that. So one of the first things you see when you get one of these filters is what comes in the box. Pretty much all of them, except for I think it was Sandmark, comes with these guys here, the universal lens wipes. Super handy, actually kind of a requirement. It's really hard not to touch the glass on these, so it's really nice to have those. The only company that really went further than that with their packaging, what comes with the product, is Polar Pro. So kind of interesting. One thing is this lifetime warranty card, which is nice to know. Obviously they don't cover everything. Basically it's any defects with the product, and I did find one defect that I'll tell you about later. So that's good knowing that you can follow through and get those replaced if needed. Tiffen also coming with a 10-year warranty, which let's face it, if this guy's still flying in 10 years, I'm going to be happy. I'm sure the filters are still going to be good. So I'm not too worried really. 10-year versus lifetime, both very good warranties. But Polar Pro also coming with some other extras. You get a couple stickers if you're into stickers. More importantly, you get these guys. So these guys help you get the filters on and off. This one in particular I like for the zoom. Really good design. Got some rubber for some friction there. You pinch and rotate. And most people actually can't get the stock filter off the Mavic 2 Zoom. I had recommended in a previous video use rubber gloves. Other people talk about using a rubber band to help you get some extra grip, extra friction on there. Both of those do work. However, this is really a tool for the job. It's not something that you're going to misplace or break like a rubber band or gloves that get all sweaty. So really a good tool there. This one here, kind of an interesting case. It really does help. It really is a nice tool for getting the stock filter off the Pro. However, strangely, it doesn't work with the Polar Pro filter, so it's only good for getting the stock filter off. Not sure why that happened, a bit of a design oversight, so a good idea, but it would be really great if it actually worked on the Polar Pro filters as well. The reason it is nice is it actually does help you kind of not touch the glass, and it kind of grabs onto the filter, holds it there. Now strangely, it actually does work with these filters from Freewell. The main limitation is on these other filters is not having the glass recessed off this front surface. So why they didn't do that, no one else actually did recess that glass, but you're never going to get it to work on one of these rotating filters here as well. So anyway, nice tool, but limited use there. Alright, so that's what's in the box. Let's look at the packaging real quick. Tiffen has these really nice cases, metal case. I'm a little bit worried about accidentally pushing on this too hard, bending some of the metal, or the retention feature wearing out over time, but absolutely no issues with the case right off the bat. Other than some of the more inexpensive filters here from Sandmark, the Tiffen zoom filters are the only zoom filters that were delivered not in a complete pile. So it actually holds on to these filters well. All the other zoom filters I got, including Polar Pro, including Freewell, Skyreet, everybody, the filters are just in a pile. So they aren't really retaining them that well. Now that said, the Skyreet filters actually do stay in. So it must have gone through some really serious shaking in the transportation process. However, Polar Pro, you heard that? One of the filters comes off very easily, and they all came off in shipping, at least most of them did. Similarly, Freewell, let's take a look here. Just lost 2 of them. With the Freewell filters, there is an easy fix. You just throw this guy on top and you put the case on. Now, the Freewell filters, other issue with the case is they're very hard to open up. So when you do try to open them up, you kind of need both hands. You wedge your fingers in there and you pop that open like that. But at least with the Freewell filters, there is a fix. You try the same fix on Polar Pro, and there's just too much room in here for the filter to come off. It'll still come off, but at least it'll be a little bit more protected. So you do kind of need to stack something in there with the Polar Pro. So that is kind of a shortcoming there, but not too bad. And the Skyreet, as I mentioned, not able to replicate the filters coming off. Sandmark, again, pretty secure. And in terms of the Pro filters, I didn't have any of that issue with the delivery. Taking a closer look at the Polar Pro case, it really is the nicest looking. You can see right in there, it's got these magnets, which is pretty slick to close the cases. Just really professional, really nice looking. Just wish they could have had a little extra retention on the zoom filters. They sent this to me in 2 cases. You can get the Pro filters in a single set, or even a bigger set for I think like $250. Same thing, they got the magnets, pretty fancy stuff. Limitation with the Polar Pro packaging that I noticed was on the Pro filters, they cover up the markings, so you can't actually see what ND the filter is, what the rating is, until you remove the filter, which is kind of annoying. So you're going to want to mark maybe some silver paint pen or something to mark, and always put them back in the same spot. So I mentioned the packaging from Freewell, Skyreet, and Sandmark taking the same approach. Very simple cases, but you know what? I don't really have an issue with these. You can't go wrong. You can see in there, they're good enough really. But Polar Pro definitely winning on the attractiveness level, but a couple shortcomings in the design there. At the end of the day, the packaging I really prefer would be if Polar Pro could actually fix their small little missteps there in the design, but for now I'm going to have to give it to Tiffen for the best packaging. Let's talk about the construction of the filters themselves. I really like the construction on the Tiffen, both filter sets. The smoothness getting the zoom filters on and off the drone was the best, and you really start to appreciate that when you're taking 54 filters on and off these drones. You really start to appreciate the smoothness of it. You start to worry about some of these coarser threads starting to damage your drone. You don't want that. So high quality threads, really a bonus there. I would have liked Tiffen to have marked the polarization on them, but other than that, they did a great job there. Tiffen does offer the rotating polarized filters, which is a nice touch, and good clear marking on these guys as well, and you can read them in the case. So Tiffen quality, excellent. The other thing you'll see on the back of the Tiffen Pro filters is they're the only ones that stuck true to the DJI designs. What do? They put in the metal inserts on both sides, and they put the little divot there, their little retention detent it's called, only on one of them, and that's really key. Makes it easier to get on and off, but does provide that locking feature. So it's just as easy to get on and off as the original DJI filter. So really, they really win for the attention to detail and making that making it identical to the DJI design intent. Polar Pro, also excellent construction. They took a little different tact on the backside there. They actually made it a little bit easier to get off and on, but it still does retain these filters quite well, and they do have the rotating polarizers, so no issues with the construction. The anodized aluminum may wear out a little quicker than the steel inserts of the Tiffen, but it may take hundreds or thousands of times putting a filter on and off the drone for that to happen, so not really sure how important that is. Polar Pro zoom filters I did have an issue with. The ND16 I actually couldn't get on in any way that I was comfortable with. So there's some little gummed up issue with the thread on one of their filters. So that is definitely a mark against the Polar Pros there. I know when they watch this and they hear back my feedback, they're going to say, oh, I'll send you another one. And they do have that lifetime warranty, so I'm not going to knock them too hard. But again, definitely the top quality threads coming from Tiffen. So how about some of these competitors? So Skyreet. Originally I thought it was Skytreat, but Skyreet. Their Pro filters I cannot recommend, guys. They are very, very difficult to get off, indicating some issues with the design or the quality of the machining they did on the retention features. And they're just very hard to get off. You start to get frustrating thinking you're just going to have to yank the thing off. You just have to play with it a lot. Not happy at all with getting them on and off. In addition to that, they put the detent on both sides of the steel insert. Kudos to Skyreet for putting in 2 steel inserts. However, with both detents, some of these filters actually rattle around on the drone. They're not preloaded, and you'll hear them vibrating and shake. It's just not good. They didn't think all that through or test it before they went into final production, so I cannot recommend the Pro filters from Skyreet, even though by far they're the lowest cost. So Sandmark was a late entrance for me. I have to be honest, I didn't actually test these. Why? They weren't going on to my Mavic 2s. Just couldn't justify risking damaging the drone for testing these filters, so these Pro filters actually didn't get tested. In terms of the zoom filters, the construction on these guys from the low-cost competitors, Freewell, Sandmark, and Skyreet, hadn't have any issues getting them on and off, so pretty happy with them from a construction standpoint. Not quite as smooth as the Tiffen threads maybe, but still go on and off quite well. So you'll have an opportunity to see all my testing results for these guys. Let's talk about the polarized filters, and are they marked, are they not? Now, many of the filters come with rotatable filters, even the Pro ones, which the Pro filters do clock on. So these filters that I was sent from Freewell do only have a single direction you can orient the polarization. However, other filters from Sandmark, from Tiffen, from Polar Pro have that rotatable filter, so you can orient it any way you want. Now, I wasn't sure really how important that was. until I played around with a filter on my Sony camera, and I was amazed. You know, it really does depend where the sun is, how you want the filter oriented. Now, how are you going to actually figure that out if without landing the drone and trying multiple orientations? Well, you kind of have to try it from the ground. You can play with sunglasses, you can play with a handheld camera and a polarized filter. But however you do it, it is nice to have the ability to rotate these filters if you really want to get the most out of your polarized lenses. And it's nice to have them marked, more importantly marked correctly. So let's take a look at that. So when it comes to the marking of polarized filter, Polar Pro really wins in that category. They're the only one to mark both their zoom filters and their pro filters, and to mark them correctly. Tiffen does a good job marking their rotating Mavic 2 Pro filters, and they're also marked correctly. The filters from Sandmark, the Pro filters, are not marked correct. The Sandmark and Freewell zoom filters are marked but are not marked correctly. Like Tiffen, Skyreet did not mark their Mavic 2 zoom filters. Now, I'd rather have them do that than mark them incorrectly. That could be misleading. That could cause you some frustration. So really, no matter who you buy from, it's a good idea to check them like you're seeing me do here in front of a TV. Now, TVs are usually polarized 90 degrees from how sun would be coming off of water, your typical glare situation. So just keep that in mind. I just take out a little Sharpie, and when they get black, turn the white screen black, I know that I can mark in the horizontal direction there to identify how they're polarized. So when it comes to polarized filters, Polar Pro doing the best job identifying the orientation. Tiffen and Sandmark also doing a good job by putting these rotating filters onto their Pro filters. Freewell does have a line of the rotating polarized filters for the Pro, but that's not what I tested. Like these Freewells, Skyreet does not have the rotating filters. At least I didn't test that style of filter from them. But luckily, nobody screwed that up. Freewell, Skyreet doing a good job polarizing their stationary fixed angle Pro filters correctly. So let's talk about ND rating. So how did I test this? So when I was taking my test shots, and I did take every filter that would go on the drones comfortably, and I took a snapshot of the target here. Now I used the exact same lighting. So what I did is I fixed the color at 4700. I fixed the F number, the aperture of the Pro, and I fixed the ISO level at 400. As I added each ND filter, each filter on there, I measured the exposure time, and I noted that and recorded that and made a graph of it. And so what you can look at is the expected ND rating versus the actual ND. If we look at all the Pro filters, Tiffen polarized filters are the only ones that came in dead on accurate in terms of their ND rating. Most of them showed up actually having a slightly lower ND value than their stated rating. So you may not get the darkening you expect if you do all the right math and put the drone back up in the air with the filter you want. Just keep in mind they may not be as dark as you're expecting. When you look at the zoom filters, the Freewell filters and actually the Polar Pro, particularly far off at ND 16. They measure closer to ND 11, so that's quite a dramatic difference. These Sandmark filters also very off at ND 8, measuring actually much higher, much darker, not all they're different than their ND 16. I will say that the ND 32 and 64, 32 from the Sandmark, and the 32 and 64 from Freewell actually do a pretty good job of tracking with their ND rating. So if you do want a darker filter for some longer exposure stuff, really bright sunlight, then they're pretty accurate. So what else was I was looking at? When I was talking to Tiffen on the phone a couple weeks ago, they were saying that what their customers really care about is color accuracy. So I did a ton of work measuring the color as it compared to the stock DJI filter, as well as actually with no filter on the drones at all. And what I did is a comparison. So rather than just looking at the color when I'm fixed at that 4700 white balance, I actually compared the color to the stock glass that comes on the product, because that's how DJI should be correcting. They should be correcting for all the issues in the design of the lenses in terms of distortion and color and everything with the stock glass. So what I'm really looking for is shifts in the performance, in the color compared to stock. And what I found was very interesting actually. Looking first at the Pro filters, the ND8 polarized filters from both Tiffen and from Polar Pro were showing up very red compared to the stock glass. So what do I mean by very red? Well, when I compare the amount of red to the amount of blue and I subtract those differences in what you're getting from the stock glass, that's a total difference of around 11% kind of reddening of the image that you're getting there. Now the ND16 filters, for whatever reason, were actually tending to shift things blue. And that's the not the polarized, but the ND filters, these guys here from Tiffen, Polar Pro, and actually Freewell as well, all shifted things significantly blue. Now, are you going to notice? Take a look at this comparison image here in terms of the colors. Now you'll notice even the stock glass not showing up as white. I'm able to write on top of these with white text and you can still read it, but what's important is this shift, and DJI is expecting a certain color to be there and it's not quite there. So if you are really like to have that color accurate and don't want the filters goofing with things, keep in mind there really isn't a safe bet. Even the two top manufacturers we'd expect to be the best in this category, Tiffen and Polar Pro, having some issues when it comes to color. It is noticeable, but it's not dramatic. So it's up to you how worried you get about that, but there really isn't a safe bet in that regard. You just kind of have to deal with what you get. We would like to see Tiffen and Polar Pro maybe stepping up their game when the Phantom 5 comes out, hopefully early next year, and taking a little bit more careful look. Maybe they don't need all the crazy coatings. Keep it a bit simpler, because even some of these filters that appear to have more simple coatings on them don't do any worse. They actually can sometimes do better. Looking at the zoom filters, the two that showed up as the reddest were the Polar Pro and the Skyread ND8 and ND16 polarized filter. The shifts in this case not quite as extreme, 6 or 8%, but still noticeably a little bit red. The one that shifted blue the most was the Freewell ND64, shifting about 6% towards the blue. Now there's another aspect you want to pay attention to, which is relative illumination, and that's how dark the corners of the images look with respect to the center of the image. The stock glass from DJI already has significant darkening in the corners that's getting corrected for. So if you take a look at the raw images and how dark they are, in addition to having distortion, there are also dark in the corners, and all that's corrected for when you make the JPEGs, mostly corrected for anyway. There is some relative illumination residual, which may just be a factor of my particular drone. Your drone may be overcorrected or undercorrected. Mine appears to be a little bit undercorrected when it comes to relative illumination, which is, again, that ratio between the light in the corner to the light at the center of the image. Looking first at the Pro filters, it's the ND16 from Polar Pro and from Tiffen that have the most darkening in the corners, with about a change of about 11% in terms of relative illumination. Now that's pretty significant. You're going to see that whether you're recording video, photos, whatever. So keep that in mind. You may want to apply some additional corrections in your editing software if you're recording with those filters. It's not very good. I'd like to see them do better. And it's definitely something to keep in mind. ND8's also showing up at the high end in the 7 to 9% range, some of the ND8 filters from these companies. So just keep that in mind. Actually getting outperformed by some of the cheaper competition in this category. Why is that happening exactly? I don't know. Maybe they're just going too crazy with the coatings. Maybe sometimes less is more. Looking at the zoom filters, Polar Pro and Tiffen actually did quite a bit better here. It was these sandmark filters that all did very poorly, showing up in the 9 to actually as much as 12% relative illumination change on these dudes. So maybe another reason to stay away from these, I don't know. But again, they're not on their own. If you look at the Pro filters, some of the top name brands having similar kinds of effects. Now I was honestly expecting the relative illumination on these Polar Pro filters for the zoom to be actually bad. I thought that amount of metal there, which is significantly more than the others, would potentially be vignetting some of the rays coming in and would be darkening the corners, but that didn't really play out. Again, these did okay, It was the Sandmark filters that didn't perform well. I can't tell you if their Pro filters did well because, again, I was having too much trouble getting them on and off. I just didn't want to mess with it. The ND64 filter from Freewell actually showed up with a significant negative change in relative illumination, meaning the corners are getting brighter. Now, what I think that actually is more of a uniform darkening, and the natural correction that was being applied basically didn't have the same effect just because the filter was so dark overall. So it's more of an evening out of the light. But if DJI is expecting the corners to be dark, what it tells you is some of these higher ND filters, you may actually end up with kind of brighter corners, which is kind of a funny effect when DJI is going then to correct the dark corners, and the corners aren't actually relatively that dark compared to the center anymore with these really high ND numbers. So yet another thing to look out for if you're using high NDs, make sure your corners aren't too bright. I'm not going to mark down Freewell for that. A really well designed prime lens shouldn't have that much relative illumination that needs correction. So it's really an artifact of DJI's correction more than I think it's an issue with Freewell's ND64 filter. So I also took a quick look at the weight of these filters, and I was actually extremely surprised. You might expect that these fancy filters with the rotating glass, its extra features, be extra weight, and it might risk the drone having some gimbal issues with overloading the gimbal and getting some error messages. Now actually when I weigh these out, I don't have the best scale, it's only got gram resolution, but every single filter seems like they overshot in terms of actually trying to keep them light. When I talked to Tiffen, they said they did quite a bit of work actually thinning the glass from their standard glass thicknesses to try to make things light. Every company did the same thing. They're all really light filters, so you don't have to worry about overloading the gimbal. You may actually have to worry about underloading it, actually tipping the balance too far towards the back. I didn't experience any of those issues flying with these filters, so the Polar Pros, just as light as everybody else, did the most flying with them because I've had them the longest and never had a gimbal error. So even though these filters are all light compared to DJI's stock glass, none of them threw any kind of errors at me, so that's good. So I talked to Tiffen. They actually recommended a few additional tests that I could try out. One was a test they do they call it the key test. So it's taking a key, which I think keys are usually brass, like plated brass. So they might have a nickel coating or something on there. They're pretty hard, as you know. They also recommend something they call the Sharpie Test, which I'll show you. But I want to take the key test to the next level because they all perform pretty well, and I went to the razor blade. So let's talk about the water and the Sharpie test first. So with water, a typical way you would check water resistance or water repelling ability, put a drop of water and you measure the contact angle. And you can see actually all the filters did really well except for Freewell. That water bubble there is spreading out quite a bit more, pilling up quite a bit higher on all the other filters. So Tiffen and Polar Pro do the most in terms of talking about their coatings and really trying to promote that. But it does seem as though Sandmark and Skyreet actually are putting those hydrophobic coatings on as well. And another way to test that is to mark them with Sharpie, confirming the exact same results. You can't actually mark most of these filters. You just get the Sharpie kind of pilling up in little tiny drops of ink that you can easily wipe off. With the exception of Freewell, the Sharpie sticks on there quite aggressively, quite a bit of rubbing. I was able to get most of it off, but at the end of the day, I'm actually going to have to use some alcohol, I think, to clean that filter. I use the ND4 because that's the filter I care the least about. But anyway, Sharpie test, a good way to check, and most of them do well. Again, Freewell not putting that extra coating on there. The next one is the key test. Again, I took the key to the ND4 of the zoom filters from all of these guys, and they all did quite well. So actually that probably explains why my zoom filters weren't all scratched up during shipping, is they can actually take a little bit of abuse. That's really encouraging actually that I wasn't able to scratch them with this key here. None of them left any mark that I could see. So wanting to take it to the next level, I took out the razor blade. And what I found was interesting. I actually had to have a brand new razor blade. So I snapped off the end and I was able to scratch the Polar Pro filter, and then I found I wasn't able to scratch the Tiffen filter. But then I went back to the Polar Pro and I wasn't able to scratch it again. The blade had dulled just from that one time of scraping across the Polar Pro. So you get these really minute scratches. It is possible with hardened steel razor blades, but pretty resistant at the end of the day. All the filters perform the same. You can scratch them with a knife, not so much with a key, so they're pretty safe even if you do drop them on the ground, stuff like that. So one thing I wanted to look at was the AR coatings. Lenses that don't have AR coatings can cause problems when it comes to stray light or transmission or relative illumination that I'll talk more about later. So I went and bought a piece of glass that was not coated, and that's on the top left of each of these shots that you're going to see here. I lined up a light source basically in line first with the camera, so like a 0 degree or close to an angle, bouncing light directly off the filters back to the camera. And I wanted to see what was harder to read. Were some of these filters better at being able to read through them at the text below them, those Mavic 2 manuals? And the answer is, well, none of them are very easy to read through at all. These are all ND4, so trying to find the lightest filters I could. But really the only one that's easy to read through is the original Mavic 2 glass that you get with the zoom there. And the same thing true on the Pro filters as well. So what does that mean? I'm not sure really. I think these are all AR coded, but not really well enough that you can read through them very well, or really that the darkening of the glass is sufficient that you can't see through them very well. I also looked at another angle, something more like a 90-degree angle here, and had similar results, all kind of shining off similar colors and still difficult to read through. So not a huge difference between these. Again, I do think they are all coded. Another test I wanted to do was take a look at how they generate stray light, any kind of ghost images. So I turned off the lights here in the studio and shone a flashlight at the camera and wanted to see if I could pick up any really crazy things, artifacts associated with stray light sources. Now none of these filters were generating any kind of ghost images when the light was off to the side of the camera, was outside of the field of view. Inside of the field of view, they all generated very similar artifacts. You can see some various reflections from the flashlight. Flashlight has several little LEDs in it. You can kind of see those, but no real differences here. The stock DJI glass didn't add much in terms of having no filter on at all, and all the other filters performed the same. I only tested the ND4s. So that's it. They all seem pretty well coded from that standpoint and no major differences. So the moment you've all been waiting for, I'm sure, which is which filter am I going to keep? Which one am I going to be flying with? When it comes to the zoom filters, I think I got to go with the Tiffins here. They're the only ones that shipped in a case where they didn't all rattle out, and that I'm really happy with in terms of getting them on and off. The threads are great. So Tiffin wins in my book. When it comes to the relative illumination and the color I'm getting out of these zoom filters from Tiffin, also excellent. It was actually Sandmark, Polar Pro, and Skyreet that didn't perform as well as the Tiffins in that category. The only thing I would improve about these Tiffin filters for the zoom is I wish they had marked them, but that only took me a couple minutes, and I took a little Sharpie and marked the metal rim there on the 3 polarizing filters that I got. If you're looking for a less expensive filters, these Skyreet filters are actually a great deal. They cost half the price. The ND8 and the ND16 polarizer did have a little bit of reddening, but other than that, I mean, they have good coatings. They perform well. They're scratch resistant, all the rest, and they're about half the price. So while they may not go on and off quite as smoothly as the Tiffin, if you're looking to save some money, this is definitely your backup plan when it comes to the zoom filters. When it comes to the Pro filters, it's all about, for me, how easily they go on and off and the packaging. Tiffin did a good job packaging. I mean, Polar Pro, definitely the sexiest packaging, but has that limitation not being able to read the polarizing filters. A little bit annoying, but not a big deal. But just the quality of the construction, the filters are marked. I give them a slight edge. Polar Pro, definitely also another good option. You're going to want to stay away from Skyreet and SanDisk. In general, I would say low cost or alternative manufacturers for the Pro just haven't panned out. Just the quality of those retention features just isn't there. Their attention to detail just wasn't there in this time around. I do expect them to be there in the future, or maybe making improvements, and I hope so. Good luck to them. Competition's always good, but I just didn't see it. Freewell makes a decent filter, but not really much of a cost savings. So again, I gotta go with one of the two big guys on this one, Tiffen or Polar Pro. There really wasn't a low cost option. Skyreet, definitely cheaper, but just not worth it. They're too hard to get on and off. So it's Tiffen, it's Polar Pro here. When it comes to zoom, it's Tiffen. Go with it. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I learned a lot. I hope you learned something along the way as well. So if you like this video, if you like the level of detail and the amount of time I spent on these, please help us out by using those links to buy your filters, or subscribing to the channel and giving us a big thumbs up. Now you can check out all these charts, graphs, images on DroneDJ.com as well. I'll have a link to that article in the description. So check us out there. We will see you next time.